Kamen Rider has really taken a liking to the word generations in recent years for their crossover films. In 2016, they started the Heisei Generations movie series and continued that through to the end of the Heisei era itself. Then we got Reiwa The Next Generation to mark the beginning of Reiwa, and after time traveling a year, they decided to still continue the trend as the series has returned in the form of Kamen Rider Beyond Generations. The crossover movie between Kamen Rider Saber and Kamen Rider Revice takes a cue from those two seasons, not only combining some of their core themes, but also by celebrating the 50th year of the franchise by looking forward in a lot of different unique and diverse ways. This film had a lot it was trying to do, but did it do any of it successfully? Well, before you hear my thoughts on Beyond Generations, make sure you give me your own thoughts on the film down in the comment section. Also keep in mind that I've previously made a bunch of videos on Kamen Rider Saber, including its previous crossover film, which I'll link to in the description if you're interested. And while I've only reviewed the beginning of Revice, I'll definitely be talking about it overall once the season is all wrapped up, so make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any of it. I think one of my favorite parts of Beyond Generations is how it utilizes the cast of the two shows. Making the special chapter at the end of Saber canon is a really neat jumping off point for the two casts to get acquainted with each other, and it's something that I'm always a fan of, even if the episode itself wasn't the greatest. I think it's awesome to see how the size of the Saber cast is used to create this incredible sense of scale for the movie's events. We see them being dispatched all across the world to these vastly different locations, and it's really fun. The fact that each location is vastly different from each other and then later revisited helps the different set pieces feel really distinct from each other, and the repetition helps this familiarity grow so that all the action is just really enjoyable and it doesn't feel like we're copying the same beats over and over. I loved seeing what is essentially the sort of logos operating in its prime. Like when there's another attack happening and Rentro's like, oh yeah, don't worry, I got my boys working on it, and then we cut to, I guess they're not really in their prime because their base has been reduced to nothing more than a green screen room, but you know what I mean. I will admit this does kind of call into question why the Sword of Logos is dealing with this non-Megid threat. I assumed that the reason they've never interacted with other threats, despite existing for centuries, is that just they're only supposed to deal with Megid threats, but I guess with the Megid defeated, now they're just like, we'll help out this government agency with their little thing. Maybe it would have been kind of cool to have Diablo, his henchmen, come from altar books instead of weird stamp thingies, but either way, it helps give all the characters some little moment, even if they're not in the film for that long. And this is very helpful, once again, considering the size of the Saber cast. Once they begin to join forces with the Revice cast, of course it just gets even better. That's like the best part of these crossover movies, of course. Obviously, the All-Rider walk, the All-Rider transformations are just really cool to see. Like, it's like such a huge volume of riders, and they all get to transform together. It's awesome. I really liked when Toma and Rintaro chastised Vice for thinking about breaking his promise to Iki, bringing back some of the lessons they learned in their own show. That was pretty cool. George has some of the best interactions in this film. Like, he immediately knows Yuri is another Kamen Rider, and then he bows to him, and then there's the part at the end where he's like interested in the Hayata's splitting capabilities. I wonder if that could relate to anything. Even interactions between characters that already know each other is a lot of fun. There's a cute moment when Yuri holds up the pin May gave him when she's giving her speech, and there's a not so cute moment with George again.
Shut up, Hiromi.
George is great. He's actually my favorite character in Revice, so. Admittedly, I kind of would have liked more interactions. Like, there's a whole bit at the end where it's just the characters, like, having fun with each other after the battle, and I kind of would have liked a little bit more of that sprinkled throughout the film. Also, like, in the last battles, there's a lot of different characters mixing together, but none of them really say a word to each other. It could have been kind of nice to get a bit of banter between the different personalities that have never interacted with each other before. What I do really like about these fights though is that as they near the end, the characters all begin to deliver a combined speech, and then we get this amazing shot of them all together. It's so cool. Then when we return to the main character fight, that shot is continued and they all merge into the Cross Saber. So not only is this a great way to bring back Cross Saber, but it also presumably means that in a way, all all of the other characters are involved in the final battle, which is really unprecedented. Usually it's just the main riders, but here we get like everyone. This is just proof that Cross Saber is one of the greatest final forms. There are just so many cool little moments like that in the movie. It's absolutely hilarious to me that at a certain point they were basically like, we're gonna interrupt Kamen Rider Beyond Generations to bring you Kamen Rider 1971. They just kind of stuck a whole like mini episode of Ichigo in here. We got a recreation of the birth of the original Kamen Rider, and then we just get a whole ass fight scene with the original Shocker Grunts, a cheesy looking monster. It's really cool though. There's even the attention to detail to make this fight a recreation of a fight from the episode that debuted this specific Ichigo suit that has been recurring for basically 50 years at this point. So that's really awesome. Then there's the stuff like the solo Revice henshin, which was a cool novelty. Toma throwing the Kaiken Rekka was just badass. And Vice, in general, I don't hate Vice in the show at all, but like in this movie, he was really funny to me personally. They cranked up his fourth wall breaking to like all the way up. It's maxed out. And I thought that would really annoy me since that's something I don't like in the show. But for the movie here, they made all the jokes about him being in a movie, and I really liked that. At the beginning, he's introducing himself in Iki to the audience, which fits because usually these films kind of are meant to introduce you to the characters. And then he says they can cheer for him in the theater because they showed this in theaters. And then when a rider kick fails, he asks how they will make money now, which he's a demon. Why would he say that? He gives the dragon a little handshake in the henshin. They're best friends. It's so cute. Then he says that bad guys who grow always lose, which is not wrong. And then at the very end of the movie, he reminds everyone to take everything with them as they're leaving the theater. I just thought it was really funny.
よくないよ。これよくないよ。ダメよ。
But my favorite moment with the heroes has to be the action sequences in the future. Having our current generation of heroes henshin into exact replicas of riders from, well, not exact because there's Piss Blade, but almost exact replicas of riders from the franchise's history to fight other evil riders from throughout the franchise's history is just awesome. I think it's really unique that it's like the consciousnesses of the characters going into clone riders rather than them using a new gimmick and kind of like transforming their normal suits into those older suits or just kind of mimicking those older suits. So it creates this really awesome effect that I've never really seen before in a rider season. But I also really love how diverse the selection of suits are. As I've said before, usually we kind of just get like the main Kamen Riders in these anniversary movies. But here, on the villain side at least, we get like Shocker Riders. When was the last time those appeared? Yongo? And then he even gets to face off against Black RX. Good stuff. Then on the hero side, we get to see some secondary rider suits, some tertiaries, a few female rider suits, which are actually also tertiaries, but let's ignore that. There's little stuff like Kamen Rider Blades gets to be Kamen Rider Blade. Daiji, who uses a bat stamp, becomes a bat Kamen Rider. Toma, who is a red Kamen Rider, becomes another red sword wielding Kamen Rider. The whole action sequence, all of those moments are incredible. But I may be a bit biased because of the thomasjujube reference. If you look at George's iPad, you can see all the riders he had ready to go, and all of them are base forms of the various riders he was going to use, including Xaid. But for some reason, separate from base Xaid is Xaid's final form, and it's just labeled Muteki like it's a separate entity called Muteki or something, which is not what happens in Xaid. So, if you haven't noticed, I've chosen to mark my online presence with a very similar looking design as a separate entity from the original rider, essentially making it my own base form. So when this movie just randomly decides to include Muteki as like its own base form, separate from Kamen Rider Xaid, I've had enough copyright claims to figure somebody at Toei probably knows about me. So the only logical conclusion is that it's a reference to me. I am referenced in this movie, and this automatically makes it one of the greatest tokusatsu movies of all time because it's me. I'm in the movie. So while the returning heroes are great, I do think the new villains are just alright. I do like some of their concepts though. Making Diablo a similar entity to GIF kind of gives an interesting perspective to the main conflict of Revice. It was pretty cool that the main deadmans of Revice were involved as some of his generals, since the villains of the show usually sit out the movies. And it was neat that he was like an old Shocker experiment, so that we have a tie to that original show, but it's not explicitly Shocker again. Although I do think it's super weird this movie establishes Shocker was capable of time travel, but they only use it to shoot a guy into space and never come back, and then he just randomly goes through a wormhole and crashes like 100 years later. It's like a really convoluted way to get Ryunosuke to the future. I kind of would have preferred if Diablo maybe just had something to do with it. That is my biggest complaint with this film, actually. That bit of time travel is kind of stupid. But Diablo's neat concepts actually also continue to the final battle, because it's just this fight against an energy barrier has, and then once it's broken, we see the CRISPR stamps have been broken, and then it's clear that everyone can actually be defeated, and the future has finally been saved thanks to Kamen Rider Century. Without a doubt, I think this film manages to be a successful Kamen Rider anniversary film and a crossover of Saber and Revice, all because it's cleverly designed to really be a film about one character, or rather a set of main protagonists. So the crossover feels incredibly cohesive because there's this central pillar of storytelling that uses all the concepts. I really liked that Century's story was about a father trying to reconcile his broken promise with his son. There's the obvious connection to Revice's family thematics, but there's also a connection to Saber's themes about keeping promises. So the main plot of the movie revolves around the ideals of our main Kamen Riders, which is really neat. But as a story, it's also just really emotional. I thought Ryunosuke's story was incredibly interesting. I love the concept of a Shocker scientist that defected because of Kamen Rider, and the mystery of his relationship with Hideo was even more interesting. One of my favorite parts of the movie is when Hideo sees his dad pull out the ticket that matches the one he's been holding onto for over 50 years, and realizes that his dad actually did care about him, and he does regret breaking his promise and not being there for his family. And I love that even after giving us the satisfaction of the reunion, the movie wasn't afraid to pull its punches, and it still created this bittersweet ending as Ryunosuke is erased from existence, but now encourages Hideo to make things right with his own son. And the way it all ties into Kamen Rider Century as the hero, when the father hasn't fixed things yet, Century is just a berserker. When he makes things worse, he can't even possess his son, meaning there's no transformation possible, and only when he makes things right can the pair come together and merge into the true Kamen Rider Century. Stuff like this is the reason I love tokusatsu. The way these awesome looking foam and spandex suits can be used to convey a deeper emotional story. The way we can go from a family reconnecting across the centuries as the end of the world is beginning, just before they do some silly poses with their hands and push a big plastic thing on their belt, create big saw blades and turn it into a big toy. It's amazing. If Kamen Rider Century is the representation of Beyond Generations as a film, then I love the Beyond Generations film. I don't think I'd say it's my favorite, because all of these Generations movies have been really good. This does. I was gonna say I don't think it's my favorite because it doesn't have Muteki, but then I remembered it does have Muteki and it's a reference to me, and combined with Kamen Rider Century and the beautiful Saber aesthetics, I might have to give this the title of being my favorite Generations film, but I think I have to give that some more thought. For now, this definitely lives up to the other films that have come before it. It's a really, really good Kamen Rider crossover movie. Let me know if you'd like to see Kamen Rider Century return in future movies, or just what you thought of Saber, Revice, or the movie in general. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned for more of my Kamen Rider videos, and I hope to see you next time.